You wake up, 35 years old, outside, a gray suburban morning. Your coffee grows cold on the kitchen counter. Your phone is silent. No one is waiting for your call. No one asks how you are. You're not married. Your job is a temporary gig, not one that gives you a sense of purpose. Yesterday, you stumbled upon a 10-year-old photo. You in a workshop, in work clothes, with a smile you no longer recognize. Back then, you knew who you were. Today, you don't. You're not alone in this. 70% of men aged 18 to 35 in the U.S. report having no close friends they can confide in about personal matters. Millions wake up with the same question. If I'm not a provider, not a father, not part of something bigger, then who am I? The paradox is simple and cruel. The more freedom, the deeper the crisis. Before, everything was clear. Work, protect, stay silent when it hurts. Today, they tell you, be sensitive, but not weak. Be strong, but not dominant. Be yourself, but not the one we criticize. Freedom without boundaries isn't liberation. It's a prison without a map. Factories closed, churches emptied, unions crumbled, bars stopped being places where you could speak your mind. And new communities? They're on Instagram, in chats, in games, where voices don't tremble and emojis replace tears. The irony is that the higher your income and education, the more often you feel chronic loneliness. Because you didn't lose status. You lost a language. The language of belonging. But this isn't the end. It's a reboot. In Arizona, men gather in garages, silently fixing tools. They don't say, I'm suffering. They say, hold this wrench. In Texas, there are therapeutic circles where crying isn't shame, but strength, where a man can say, I don't know who I am, and hear in response, me neither. You feel it too, an emptiness in your chest, a noise in your head, a fatigue in your body that sleep can't cure. Look here, it's not your fault. The world has changed, and they didn't give you a new compass, but you can build one, piece by piece, through action, through a silent, I'm here, through the choice to be not a perfect man, but a real one. And this is where it gets interesting. Jason stood at the gates of the Ohio factory, holding his last paycheck. His entire world fit into three things: his pickup truck keys, the badge on his chest, and the certainty that his labor mattered. His father had worked there for 40 years. His grandfather, even longer. And now, a sign on the door. Production ceased. Not temporarily. Not relocating. Ceased. That evening, he didn't go home. He got in his car, turned on the radio, and just drove until he ran out of gas. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know who needed him. Work wasn't just income. It was his face in the mirror. And now that reflection had vanished into the dust of the Rust Belt, where from 1980 to 2000, millions of jobs were lost, destroying not only the economy, but also the self-perception of an entire generation. Do you feel it too? Not hunger, not cold, but that dull emptiness when your labor no longer fits into someone's life. In the 20th century, masculinity in America was built on one cornerstone: the male provider. This role provided not only money, but also status, respect, and identity. To be a man meant to provide, and to provide meant to exist. But when globalization, automation, and factory closures in the Rust Belt destroyed millions of such jobs, it wasn't just the economy that collapsed. It was a system of meaning. Men were left with empty hands and an empty question. If I no longer earn, then who am I? Society offered no answer. Instead, a vacuum. In it, anxiety grows. In it, isolation thrives. In it, a sense of uselessness matures, confirmed by the rise in suicides among men aged 25 to 45, as shown in research by Dr. Michael K. Imagine. You come to the same place where your father taught you to hold a wrench, and there are only rusty gates and a for sale sign. The closure of factories didn't just destroy jobs. It erased entire ecosystems of male belonging. Life revolved around the factory, union meetings on Fridays, church on Sundays, the bar after shifts, where you could sit silently next to those who understood you without words. These places weren't just a backdrop. They were the fabric that bound men into a community. When the factory left, so did this fabric, and all that remained was silence, a silence in which echoes are loudest, especially when no one answers your question, "Are you needed here?" And now look at yourself. You have no factory, no union, no bar where you can be silent together. The church is empty. Marriage is not a guarantee. Your job is temporary. And you stand in this emptiness like Jason, holding not a paycheck, but your ultimate question: who am I without a role? But even if work disappeared, why didn't other institutions pick up the slack? After all, men always had three pillars: work, marriage, and faith. They provided a role, a ritual, and brotherhood. So why have these pillars also collapsed today? The answer lies not in your weakness. It lies in a system that stopped offering men not just rights, but a place. You haven't broken. You've been left without a map in a world that erased all roads. Mark sat on a park bench, watching other people's children play ball. His own were 2 states away, with his ex-wife, in a house where he was now a guest. After the divorce, he lost not only his ring, but also the right to be called a father on weekdays. The court gave him 2 weekends a month, 2 days to be someone. The rest, a 1-bedroom apartment, alimony, and TV shows, where the echo of his footsteps was louder than the dialogue. He didn't cry. Men don't cry. But one day, he stopped answering calls, because he didn't know what to say. Who was he now? Not a husband, not a father, just Mark. Do you know that feeling? Since 2000, the percentage of men living outside marriage and without children has increased by 42%. This isn't a statistic. It's the silence in an apartment where no one is waiting. It's a calendar with 2 red days a month. It's an emptiness where a name once was. Marriage, church, union. 3 pillars on which male identity stood for centuries. Marriage transformed a youth into a head of household. The church provided brotherhood and a moral compass. The union, a back-to-back, and a voice in the collective. All of this worked as rites of passage, hunting a lion, the first day at the factory, vows at the altar. But today, marriage is a fragile contract. Church is an optional choice, and the union is a museum exhibit. And you are left alone with the question, who am I if I am no longer called by name within these walls? The latest data from the Pew Research Center, the proportion of men who regularly attend religious services has fallen from 48% in the 90s to 29% in 2024. Another brick, another crack. 70% of men aged 18 to 35 say, I have no friend I can confide my pain in. This is not because they don't want intimacy. It's because the army, the church, the factory, the baseball team, all of it has disappeared. And likes and chats don't replace silent presence. Isolation is not a choice. It is a systemic result of collapse. And in this emptiness, it's easy to grasp at extremes. At podcasts that shout about strength, at forums that promise simple answers to complex questions. Do you also catch yourself thinking, if I'm not a husband, not a father, not a worker, then who am I? Now look here. If real institutions have disappeared, where do you go for your self-image? To the screen, to YouTube, to movies. There they show you a real man is either an action hero or a meditating guru or a billionaire with a perfect beard. But these images are not a map. They are a trap. Because they are exaggerated, contradictory, and never reflect your fatigue on a gray morning. And the more you watch, the more you feel, I don't measure up, but it's not your fault. They told you, be whoever you want, but they gave you neither a compass nor a road. Aidan was watching his 3rd John Wick movie in a row. The screen flickered in the dark room, reflecting in his pupils. The hero was silent. He fought. He survived. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just was. Aidan was 15. The next day in the school hallway, he was pushed from behind and called a nerd. He tried to respond with a look, like Wick. Cold, confident, silent. In response, laughter. You think you're tough? They yelled. He went home, turned on the movie again. Because only there was a man, not a question. He was the answer. Have you ever caught yourself doing that? You watch an action movie and think, that's the real deal. And then you return to a world where you're asked to show vulnerability, but judged for weakness. Where a podcast screams, be an alpha, and a therapist whispers, acknowledge your fear. And you freeze. Not a boy, not a man. just a person who's lost the instructions. Hollywood offers two options. Either you're a faceless fist or a sensitive yogi in a linen shirt. YouTube adds a third, an alpha male with a six-pack and a list of 10 steps on how to control women. And in the dark corners of forums, a fourth. You're a victim. The system took everything from you. These images aren't just different. They're at war, and you are the battlefield. In 25 years, the proportion of films with emotionally complex male characters has fallen by 31%. But hypermasculinity thrives in blockbusters, in trends, in the loudest voices. Imagine, since childhood, you've been told, be whoever you want. Not a boy, not a girl, just yourself. But by 16, you're looking for an online group that clearly states, a real man doesn't do that. Why? Because the brain abhors a vacuum. Freedom without boundaries isn't wings, it's a fall. And you grasp at the first thing that offers support, even if it's a lie. Even if it's rage masked as strength. 64% of teenagers from open families have tried such communities. Not out of malice, out of despair. They needed an answer, any answer. But the problem isn't that the images lie. The problem is that no one shows the way. Where is your rite of passage? Where is the moment when elders lay a hand on your shoulder and say, you've made it, now you are one of us? Before, it was hunting, the first shift at the factory, the oath in the army. Today, nothing. Only a screen, and voices arguing about who you should be, and you remain in limbo, waiting for a sign. And if there isn't one, you create it yourself, even if it leads you astray. Lucas sits on the edge of his bed, 22 years old. His framed diploma gathers dust on the shelf. His first paycheck went to rent and streaming subscriptions. He did everything right. But inside, emptiness. Not failure, not disappointment. Just a nagging question. When will I become a man? Not by passport, not by age, but by feeling. Deep in his bones, now I am in my place. He looks at his father. At 22, his father was already handed the keys to the house he built himself. And Lucas? He doesn't know what to build. Do you ask yourself that question too? In Maasai tribes, a boy becomes a man when he kills a lion. Among the Inuit, when he goes hunting alone for the first time. In Japan, when he takes on the care of his family. The ritual is painful, dangerous, but clear. It says you have passed. You are now one of us. And for you, graduation, a hat in the air. First, job, entry into the system. First night with a woman, awkwardness, and silence in the morning. None of these events are marked as a transition. They just happen. And you remain in limbo, not a boy, but not a man either. Just a person, waiting for a signal that never comes. Research in the Journal of Men's Studies confirms Men under 30, without rites of passage, are 7 times more likely to experience chronic anxiety and a feeling of incompleteness. Not because they are weak, because the brain demands a marker. Without it, chaos. Now look at the statistics that are jarring. Men aged 25 to 45 are the fastest growing group for suicides in the U.S. This isn't depression without cause. It's a cry for meaning. Dr. Michael K. showed 68% of these men wrote the same thing in their suicide notes. No one needs me. I don't belong. I don't know why I'm here. Silence becomes a character. It sits with you in the car. It stares from the ceiling at 3 in the morning. It whispers, maybe you shouldn't even be here. But here's the paradox. When society doesn't provide rituals, men invent them. In Arizona, garages, without words. Only the sound of a wrench passed from hand to hand. In Texas, circles where you can say, I don't know who I am, and hear, me too. This isn't therapy. It's not a club. It's an informal ritual of a new era. Shared labor, silent presence, action without judgment. You are not alone. Your ritual just hasn't been named yet, but it has already begun. The moment you stopped pretending everything was okay. Look here. Being a man isn't about waiting for a sign. It's about creating it yourself. Even if it's just silence in a garage. Even if there's only one other person next to you who is also searching. That's already a start. The sun is already setting over the Arizona desert, but it's still muggy in the garage on the outskirts of Phoenix. The air thick with the smell of engine oil and hot metal. 3 men stand around a workbench, scarred by years of work. One tightens a nut on an old drill, its motor groaning with each turn of the wrench. The second sharpens a drill bit on a grinding wheel. Sparks, like tiny lightning bolts, fly into the darkness. The third silently brushes metal shavings with a small brush, his calloused fingers moving precisely, almost meditatively. No one speaks. No one asks, "How are you?" And yet, in this silence, there's a language deeper than words. Do you feel it too? When words burn, but your hands know what to do. This isn't just repairing a tool. It's a ritual, replacing lost rites of passage. Here, no one demands them to be strong. Here, they simply exist, and that's enough. To feel again that you are not alone. Why do such places work where therapeutic offices often fail? Because for many men, communicating through action isn't an avoidance of feelings, but the only accessible path to them. When hands are busy, the prefrontal cortex relaxes, and defense mechanisms, suppression, denial, rationalization, lose control. Shared work creates a safe space. There's no pressure to speak, but there's an opportunity to be heard even without words. Imagine you don't have to say, "I'm hurting." You just pass the file. And that's enough. That's why men's sheds aren't just hobby clubs. They are informal, therapeutic communities where men restore what they've lost, a sense of belonging, confirmed not by likes, but by shared effort. And it works not despite the silence, but because of it. Because in the quiet broken only by the sound of a file on steel, trust is born. But here's a paradox that hits harder than any hammer. High-income men with degrees from elite universities, with homes in the suburbs, they are the ones who most often admit they have no one they can tell, "I'm not doing well." According to a 2023 YouGov study, over 70% of men aged 18 to 35 in the U.S. have no close friend for personal conversations. Why? Because success doesn't replace brotherhood. Unions have disappeared. Churches have emptied. According to Pew Research, the proportion of men regularly attending religious services fell from 42% in 1990 to 21% in 2024. Bars have become places for dates, not for conversations between friends. And even if you have everything, a Tesla in the garage, a Headspace subscription, a perfect Instagram profile, you can feel completely alone. Especially if you are a man raised with the belief that asking for help means admitting weakness, not showing courage. These new communities, garages, retreats, support groups, offer hope. They show that men can still find each other without scripts, without roles, without masks. But there's a problem. These spaces, born from a desire for healing, are increasingly under fire in an ideological war. Because today, being a man means standing on a battlefield. Not a physical one, an ideological one. And masculinity, instead of becoming a place of refuge, has turned into a weapon in the hands of both those who want to destroy it and those who want to return it to its pure 1950s form. In this conflict, it's not ideas that suffer, it's people. Do you feel this tension? When every word about men becomes a ticking time bomb. But there is a way out. It already exists. In the garage, in the silence, in the past wrench. He just helped a colleague carry boxes. He simply reached for the handle, not out of pride, not out of a desire to show strength, but because that's what his father, his grandfather, all the men before him did, politely, silently. And in response, a whisper behind his back, "There's that toxic masculinity again." He froze, not from anger, from the feeling that his body had become alien, as if breathing was already a transgression. Have you felt that too? When a simple gesture, extending a hand, opening a door, offering help, suddenly becomes suspicious. The term toxic masculinity was not originally a weapon. In the 80s, therapists used it to describe what broke men from within, staying silent when in pain, striking when scared, dying rather than showing tears. It was a diagnosis, not a condemnation. But by the 2010s, the word was reduced to a poster. Now, it didn't mean some patterns are harmful, but you are harmful simply for being born a man. And when you are judged for breathing, you stop breathing aloud. You retreat into the shadows. You seek out those who don't see you as a threat. Here's the jaw-dropping paradox. Radical feminists and incels, left-wing professors and right-wing podcasters, all of them, despite their war, agree on one thing. The old model of man is dead. But then, silence. Some demand, erase masculinity as a mistake. Others shout, bring back the 50s! And millions of ordinary men remain in a vacuum. Not boys, not warriors, not yogis, just people who have lost their map. And in this emptiness, both garages in Arizona and toxic forums are born, where despair is masked as strength. But what if the answer isn't in ideologies? What if true masculinity isn't about muscles, silence, or control? What if it's in the moment when you look another man in the eye and say without words, I am here, not as a savior, not as a victim, just present? Because being a man means taking responsibility not only for yourself, but also for those around you, even if the world no longer gives you a role, especially then. Look here. The problem isn't you. The problem is that everyone has forgotten masculinity isn't a wall. It's a bridge, and it can be rebuilt with hands, with silence, with a past wrench. Rain taps on the garage roof as if the sky also wants to come in. Jason hands a 12-millimeter wrench to the newcomer. The other man takes it. And in that gesture, there are no words, but everything. 3 years ago, he sat in his pickup truck with an empty tank and an empty heart. Today, he's here. Not a hero, not a savior, just a man who knows being present is already an act of courage. The crisis of masculinity in America isn't about men being broken. It's about the world removing all bridges and saying, swim. Factories closed, marriages fell apart, churches emptied, and instead of rituals, a screen where they shout at you, be strong, but not rough. Be vulnerable, but not weak. Be yourself, but not the way we're afraid of. This isn't freedom. It's a trap. And in it, men suffocate in silence. Because the real pain isn't in losing a job. It's in losing the right to say, I'm not okay. Are you silent too? When everything inside is collapsing, and outside there's only the mask of everything's fine. Look at Jason. He didn't bring the factory back. He didn't build an empire. He just opened a door. And now there are 5 here. Then there will be 10. Then more. Not because they found the answer, but because they stopped being afraid of the question. Here's the trick. True masculinity was never in armor. It was in a hand extended in the dark. In the word, hold this, said without fanfare. In the willingness to say, I don't know, and not die of shame. The hero, in an action movie, stays silent until he falls. A real man says, I need you. And in that is his strength. Because being a man is a choice, Not a choice between strength and weakness, not between alpha and beta, but between loneliness and connection, between pretense and truth, between I'll handle it myself and let's do it together. Every time you stay silent instead of calling out, you choose a prison. Every time you reach out a hand, you choose freedom. And this freedom isn't loud. It's in the silence of the garage, in the spark of the grinding wheel, in the cracked coffee mug, silently pushed closer to you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be strong. You have to be real. Even if your hands tremble, even if your voice cracks, especially then, because only through vulnerability is brotherhood born. And without brotherhood, there is no man. There is only a shadow wandering through an empty house. Look here. Jason no longer searches for himself in the mirror. He finds himself in the eyes of another. When that person nods, accepting the wrench. And here's a question for you. What will you choose? To wait for the world to give you a role, or to create it yourself? With your hands, with silence, with the choice to be present. Remember, being a man is a choice, and it doesn't start tomorrow. It starts now.